is like chiropractic medicine. Like all I really know is like popping backs.
Yeah.
So could you give me more?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure can. Sure can. So, okay. So, this is the brain. That's as if you're looking at me, right? This is the right hemisphere. This is the left. This is the brainstem. This is the cerebellum. This is the vestibular system. Here's your ears. Okay. So, joints, do they want to move or not move? They want to move, right? So, what happens when you have injuries, for the most part, 99.8% of the time, is that joints stop moving. They get stuck, okay? And so when they get stuck, they create inflammation, they create pain, they create muscle tension around them. And what they also do, which is what we now understand is probably the most important thing that we know now, is that they send information to the brain. And it goes up what we call ipsilaterally. So if your left lower back was injured, it's going to go up to the left lower brainstem, and it's going to come up to here, going to touch this, going to touch this. It's going to cross over at the pontine level, so the middle part of your brainstem, the pons. It's going to cross over to the mesencephalon, or the midbrain, the top part of your brainstem, and it's going to go to the cortex. Okay, and it's going to get processed. Okay, so we have in the brain up through there, we have a map. And this map sees these joints and muscles and tendons and ligaments and everything, and basically says, I understand what's supposed to happen here, but if it gets blotched out a little bit, or if something happens, then it can't coordinate it well, okay? So what we want to understand generally, conceptually, is that the brain isn't just sending information down to the body to control and coordinate it, it's sending information up to it. And so if you didn't remember anything I said today about the physiology, just remember this, that information has to go to the brain first, for the most part, in order for your brain to execute a proper movement, okay? So what happens is once it gets to the brain up here, it's processed, right? Can you picture like a little circle of death, right? Like when your computer is processing something, right? And it's like slow and it's not downloading it fast enough. Well, what happens here is the faster you process this, the faster your movement is. So in athletics or something, if you see somebody, do something really quickly, or like a really great boxer, right? And you see somebody throw like a super quick jab and somebody does this, that's super fast processing, right? So they have information coming in, whether it's through the visual system, or it's through the body, or whether it's through your vestibular system, your inner ear, or whatever it might be, and it's processed, and then there's some kind of movement. Now what happens is, what creates that input to the brain? Any ideas? You said it earlier.
How was it like the snapping of the back?
It's movement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's movement, exactly. Yeah, it's not necessarily the snapping of the back, but it's the movement,
Okay.
right? So movement creates the input that the brain needs through joints, muscles, nerves, tendons. They have these little things in them called sensors, receptors, I should say, but they're like sensors. So these little receptors, you have joint mechanoreceptors, you have the Pacinian corpuscles, you have muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, all these things from joints and muscles. They respond to either stretch or movement, but basically just movement, right? You can just generally say. So if we lose movement, then we lose, not completely, but we lose this input to the brain. what happens is this brain's map, the grid map over here, is formed by these receptors. They're the little cartographers, which are people that draw maps, if you will. They're the little guys that go in there and they draw the map. So we need the information to be able to know how to draw a map, right? We just had Indigenous Peoples Day, right, this weekend. So they didn't know what the hell North America looked like until, when they got there, then they drew this big blob. It wasn't really accurate, right? So if we don't have good information in, the map can't be good, right? So the map gets kind of smudged out. And what happens is the body starts to, it's still going to get some kind of understanding of what's going on. So let's say your left sacroiliac joint or lumbar joints are restricted, right, or not moving, right? So they have decreased range of motion. They're just kind of stuck. Then the brain has to recoup that information somehow, and so it uses other muscle groups to start to get that information. So that's called the cortical spreading of information. So you're like, when you've been practicing like me for a while, you realize that people, when they have initial injuries, they're pretty pinpoint to some degree. But if they've had them for a while, they come to see me, like a lot of people come to see me 5-10 years later, like they have been around trying to see everybody and it's not fixed yet and blah, blah, blah. So we have to go in and work backwards from all these things. And this is where my neurology all comes in. And you realize oh yeah, well they have hip flexor tightness. Now they have hamstring tightness. Now they have shoulder pain. Now they have angulations and postural changes and all these things that the brain did to try to redraw its map to some semblance of normal. It's not as good as what would be with the really specific information, but it's better than nothing, and you can still get by, So if we lose this, we lose the map for the most part. And then the brain takes longer to process information. So now, when it comes back down through, it can't coordinate that very well. So now you see people with changes in gait, changes in the way their joints are angulated in their lower extremity. And you can't perceive, where you're stepping or moving in the sense of a lower back issue. So all kinds of things start to, over time, the brain is a wonderful compensator, okay? Start to happen that is not very good. And ultimately, you come in to see me and you're like, I have pain all through this area, or I have tingling down my legs, or whatever it might be, and that's what you give me, right? And so from there, I say, okay, you have back pain, you have tingling down your legs. I know I'm starting, let's say, in the lower back. Now I have to evaluate and see what the function of these areas are doing. How do I do that? Well, the most simple way to understand it is to understand what should be happening. What's normal? Well, normal is these joints moving fluidly, these muscles having good tone, they're not super tight when you squeeze them, or, it's not how we do it, but if you squeeze your muscle, right, if you do this, it's hard, right? If you relax it, it's softer, right? You don't want it to be hypertonic when it's not supposed to be. And so you look through and we evaluate all these things, and we come down and neurologically, I evaluate the brain as well to look at that mapping and see what's going on there. And you say, how do you do that? It's like, well, if the parietal lobe is affected, if something in the lower back's affected, the parietal lobe is going to be affected. The parietal lobe is where you receive all sensory information from your body, okay? So the sensory information comes there. It's like the gatekeeper. Well, the thalamus is technically what you would call the gatekeeper, but so it goes to the thalamus first, then the parietal lobe, but don't worry about it. The the parietal lobe takes that information in, and it processes it through its mapping, through its grid map. And if that grid map isn't good, guess what? The output's not going to be very good. But it processes whatever it has available for information. and it sends it to the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe creates a motor command that is what the signal sends down through here. So it goes up to the parietal lobe, comes over to the frontal lobe, and that's what creates the motor command, or the coordination. Now that comes through the cerebellum, which is really important in other parts of the brain. The cerebellum is about coordination. It's going to make sure the movement, the activity is healthy, it's coordinated well. Like you're not, reaching, I'm not reaching for this and I end up here. Or I reach this and my hand does this, or I'm here, right? So it's really important. And there's lots of other parts of the brain involved, basal ganglia, that's going to coordinate all kinds of things. And we're not going over that today, type stuff. But understand there's more involved. But I want you to understand the concept of, if you lose movement here, you lose input, feedback, sensory input to the brain changes its mapping, and then it has trouble coordinating the right movement. Okay. Now we're here, right? Where we're saying, okay, we at least know what's going on. Let's say now we know where the problem is. Let's say this is L4 and L5, and let's say the problem is over here, in the facet joints, okay, and they're restricted, they're stuck, and that also means the muscles around them are tight. Because of Hilton's law, we know that the nerve innervates the joint and the muscles around that joint. What does that mean? That means that they're not isolated, working in isolation. They're all connected. They're all connected, all right? But you can't have one without the other. So if you injure the joint, you injure the muscle. If you do either of those, you're affecting the nerve. If you do any of those, you're affecting that input to the brain. So then there's Mack's law, this is my last name, right? That says it's not just nerve, joint, muscle, it's also brain, right? So the law is that also the brain is highly involved in this, okay? And so if you look at the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe, one way you can look at the parietal lobe, there's like a bunch of ways. One way you can look at the parietal lobe is by looking at smooth pursuit movements of the eyes. Because smooth pursuit movements of the eyes are directly connected to the parietal lobe. So that's really important. Because if your smooth pursuits are reduced in activity or function, they're dysmetric, meaning they're just not nice and smooth, they're kind of choppy and different things. It could be a problem here, right? Or if you have this problem in the parietal lobe, it's going to create more of a problem here. So you could help redraw the map actually through brain mechanisms too. So you could do smooth pursuit activities. While we're going to talk about in a second what we would do for down here, you can do therapies for the brain, for the cerebellum, for the brainstem, for the muscles, for the joints, for the nerves, anywhere along this pathway. That's going to help that recover. That's what chiropractic neurology is looking at not things in isolation and saying, okay, you have back pain, I'm a chiropractor, so I'm just going to adjust your back, crack your back, like you said, right? And that should fix everything. Guess what? Sometimes it does. Guess also what? Sometimes it doesn't, right? So is that because chiropractic doesn't work well? Absolutely not. Chiropractic works great. But what happens sometimes is the mapping and the muscles and all these things, they also need attention. So we have to look at the human body or any injury or dysfunction as a comprehensive model, or comprehensive model, yeah. But we are not just in diagnostically, but we also have to treat it that way. So diagnostically, we look at it like that. We also treat it that way. And so you say, okay, what do I have to do here? Well, what's the problem? There's a lack of movement. How do we fix it? Restore movement. Okay? So one of the ways that we can restore movement is through chiropractic. But we have to be specific. You can't just sit there and crack your back in your seat and expect this thing to get fixed. It's another topic I just have to cover before we go, is self-manipulation isn't good. Okay? But, because a lot of people do it. But we use chiropractic specifically at L4-5. I don't want other areas moving as well, because that specific map, other areas are compensating already, not just of the muscles, but of the spine. So like up here, you get into like L3, L2, L1, they're probably moving a little too much to compensate for this reduction in motion. The brain is using the surrounding areas to spread or increase its map. Because the map here isn't good, it has to compensate by spreading its map in the body, taking in more information that is then creates more problems, basically. But it's just trying to survive, basically. Okay, keep you moving. Then we do all kinds of muscle work. We do all kinds of PT and OT and rehab specifically to the areas that are involved. So you're like, okay, what would you do for L4-5? Well, theoretically, what else is in the area? You've got the quadratus lumborum, you've got your iliocostalis, you got your, all your spinal stabilizers. You've got your iliopsoas attaches in here. You're probably going to have, which is your hip flexor. You're going to have glutes and all these different things. So if you evaluate all those things, you figure out which ones are involved, and you devise treatment for that. So we do muscle PT work for that. And you have nerve and brain, right? And you have discs involved too. We do disc rehabilitation for these things, so that's really important. And within this, there's lots of different pieces. So, people are doing active muscle release, they're doing percussive therapy, they're doing different variations of E-stim, they're doing stretching, they're doing strengthening, we're doing disc decompression, we're doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy for this to help it heal. We're doing all kinds of different things for these things. So the nerves and brain, we talked a little bit about, okay, for instance, it's the right parietal lobe that's affected because it's the left side of the body. So we're going to have people do right pursuits. Those following a target to the right, to their right, smoothly, is going to help charge this pathway up and help this heal faster and help redraw this map better. Okay. We're also going to do frontal lobe eye exercises, which are quick eye movements from right to left. Okay, and right to left helps to reform this connection from the frontal lobe, the corticospinal tracts to the body. Okay, so that's what chiropractic really is, right? It's kind of interesting, I think, because it's a lot more than just cracking your back, right? And chiropractors know this, and they do this, right? And they look at all of these things. Some just approach it a little differently than I do, right? But generally speaking, it's all about movement. It's all about the movement. But it has to be specific, But do you guys ever exercise and feel better? There's information out there that if you exercise, you're less, that's better than depression medications. Have you seen that lately? If you haven't, that's out there, research. Movement stimulates the brain. But what happens, how does it redraw the map? You might be asking. Great question. How it does it is through neuroplasticity. You're right, I thought it was neurophysiological today. So it does it through neuroplasticity. So if I take this little circle and blow it up, right, make it a bigger, larger view, it would look like this. And you would have I'm going to just talk about 2 neurons. We have, over 100 billion, but we're going to talk about 2. And so what happens is it's not about the number of neurons you have that make you healthy and make you, function well. It's about the connections between them. And so when you're born, you're actually born with the same amount of neurons that you have now. I mean, minus a few maybe. But it's actually the way that you connect them and create these synapses in between them that allow you to form the way you are now. Okay, we're not like we were when we were 2. We're much different. We're much more evolved and advanced, and it happens because of these connections that you make between the neurons. So we're kind of drawing A to B. Let's pretend these aren't just 2 neurons. They're actually a big group of neurons and a big group of neurons. We're creating a road in between them. We call these neural pathways. Okay. These are neural pathways. They're like roads in the brain, and they carry information back and forth. They process things. The more connections you have in the brain, the faster the connection is, the faster you process it. So you want a lot of these connections. Dr. Mack, how do I make more connections in the brain? Well, you have to stimulate that part of the brain with whatever it does. Okay? So in the sense of the parietal lobe here, we want to stimulate the parietal lobe with what it does, which is receives information from the body. So if we give it more information from the body accurately, or let's say we restore this, we create more connections, because what happens is when you have an injury like this, you lose some of these connections. They slow down. Have you ever heard the expression, if you don't use it, you lose it? So like a muscle, if you put your arm in a cast for 6 months, it's gonna have less muscle mass when you bring it out. It atrophied. Similarly in the brain is the same way. If you don't stimulate it, it atrophies. Now, just like a muscle, you can get it back, but you have to use it. You have to use it. And so if I want to build, let's say my arm was in a cast for 6 months. If I want to build my bicep, let's say my bicep back up, I'm not going to do leg extensions. It's the wrong area, right? I need to do these. So I have to get this area activated properly. So I have to be very specific. I'm not going to just say, oh, you hurt your back, go do crossword puzzles. You're like, well, that stimulates the brain. It's like, yeah, it does, but not in these areas. It's good to do, right? But, so we want to stimulate this area. So one way we do that through all these mechanisms. So if we bring in, so we want to stimulate it. We want to stimulate it. The neuroplasticity forms when you do things temporally, it's called, but frequently. I want to do the same thing over and over and over again. And what that does is that creates more of these connections. You also want to do it what's called spatially. You want to do it comprehensively like we do, right? You want to do all kinds of different therapies that are aimed around the same thing, movement. And we do that by using joint therapy, chiropractic, right? We do all kinds of PT, muscle work, do the nerve and the brain stimulation, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And sometimes, not always for like these types of things, but more in the brain side of things that I do. Like if I have somebody come in with concussions, we're doing more neurological rehab. Less of the body work and more of the brain work. And when we have somebody come in with back pain, for instance, we're doing more body work and less of the brain work. Does that make sense? So the priority shifts, and we do a ton more. And that's probably too much to get into today, because that's really in depth. But it's pretty cool. It helps, and it fixes people with all kinds of things, which is really neat, because we're all just this. We're all just a bunch of connections, and when these pathways break down, we lose function. So as we start to rebuild these pathways through the comprehensive care and frequency, eventually this becomes really fast and well mapped again. This map gets redrawn, and your pain and symptoms go away. Yeah. And this is it's redrawn. This is moving well, so we're getting great information back and forth very quickly. It's processed properly, and everybody's happy. And that's what chiropractic is. And that's where chiropractic neurology helps to it's so much else that it does in what I'm showing you. I'm showing you a very simplistic view of it. You might say, it doesn't seem very simplistic. Hopefully I kind of made it a little bit conceptual for you. It's really quite in-depth. But what you want to understand is your body is interconnected and nothing works in isolation. So if our body and our brain are integrated. And if we look at problems as if they're just isolated, we're probably missing some stuff. That being said, we might be able to get this done that way, but sometimes there's more. Sometimes there's more to the story, and that's where chiropractic neurologists come in. I'm basically a specialist that can treat basic stuff really well, but we take difficult cases on that people have had challenges with. And it's not because those practitioners aren't good at what they do. It's not hitting the other areas that are involved. Because remember, it's nerve, joint, muscle, and brain. And if they've had this for a long time, let's say years, we may have to go into the brain and do a bunch of rehab, because effects have happened up there where these pathways have been broken up, and they rewire. Okay, so they rewire and they form these compensatory pathways. And it screws everything up. So we have to go in there and rewire this stuff for people. Basically, there's a term called synaptic arborization, pruning. It's like pruning a tree. If you cut branches back on a tree, you direct growth along the branches that are still alive or present. And that actually makes the tree healthier. It's kind of paradoxical in a way. You think like, if I cut branches off a tree, it's gonna make it unhealthy. It actually makes it healthier. Because a lot of these branches that are growing, they're not doing anything. They're not functional. They're just sucking energy from the tree. And so what happens is these things, they're kind of getting things done, but not very well, but they're sucking more energy from it than is really required. And so what we want to do, once again, is go in and recreate the proper ones. Because you might question, you might ask, well, how do we get rid of these? Well, you get rid of them by doing the right thing, okay? And so as you redraw those, these start to disappear. The brain starts to just literally eat them away. And as it eats them away,